Truthspresso, episode 333.
In a world gone bonkers,
it is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started, and
where the culture is a dumpster fire,
we're coming for your children,
and churches have lost their way.
I am really uncomfortable with the story of the crucifixion.
It's time to wake up with Truthspresso.
Truthspresso.
Your weekly shot of truth. And now your host, Daniel Minnick.
Hey there, friends, family foes, and lurkers alike. This is your host, Daniel Minnick, for another exciting episode of Truthspresso. And if you're just listening to this episode on release day, you might be checking your calendar, or checking your watch, or checking the clock on your phone, and asking yourself, wait, is today Monday? No, your eyes and ears and nose and all your senses are not deceiving you. This is not Monday. This is a special episode of Truthspresso, and in the last episode, I mentioned that I wasn't quite sure if I would end up releasing another episode of Truthspresso for this coming week because I'm going to spend an extended weekend participating in a fundraiser for a pregnancy resource center. And usually, by the time I put notes together and I record, I end up doing most of that on the weekend, because doing it during the week just kind of gets busy, you know. But this episode is special. I thought I would make an episode to advertise Truthspresso for a contest that I was just volunteered into. And this is the Dead Man Walking podcast, and every year, the Dead Man Walking podcast hosts a podcast tournament. A lot of your favorite apologetic, evangelical, reformed podcasts will enter a tournament, and there will be two pitted against each other, and the winner will advance to the next bracket, and so on, until you ultimately end up with one winner for that year. And so I found out by an email from Andrew Rappaport, the head of Striving for Eternity Ministries, that hosts quite a few podcasts along with Truthspresso, that some of our podcasts ended up in this tournament. And so, because Truthspresso is there and you, listeners of Truthspresso, have a chance to vote on it, and I will provide links to that in the show notes for this episode, and so I encourage you to follow the link and go and vote for your favorite podcast, or Truthspresso, whichever one comes first or something. And I'd like to lay out a few reasons why you should vote for Truthspresso. Just off the top of my head, number one, the host is very good looking. I mean, you can absolutely tell. Not by any picture, but just by the voice alone. You know, I have a face for radio and stuff like that, or a face for podcasting anyway. So if you hear my voice, you just know that the host, Daniel Minnick, has got to be a fantastic looking guy. And so on that basis alone, that should be enough for you to vote for Truthspresso. Reason number two, we cover a lot of topics on Truthspresso. We're not the morning news. We're not the Love of God podcast. We're not the How You Can Read Through the Bible in 1 Year podcast. We are Truthspresso, and we tackle lots of stuff. I've had episodes about Jehovah's Witnesses. I've tackled topics like the Trinity in depth. I've even had a series on Is Jesus Like Your Favorite Superhero? And recently have an ongoing series going through the Book of Mormon, doing a deep dive into the Book of Mormon and some of the nuances there. I mean, come on, how could you not vote for Truthspresso? And my wife is a frequent co-host with me, and we've gone through tips for finding a spouse, how to treat your spouse, how to treat your children, So with the sky as the limit there, while keeping things focused on the Bible, sometimes throwing a little humor. Oh yeah, episodes talking about, did Trump really say that? I mean, come on. If you've heard those episodes, how many podcasts do you know have gone through some of the things that were alleged about Trump before the election, things that he said years ago and up until close to the present, and debunked them all, along with a series going through the Book of Mormon. And I've also written a book co-authored with my brother about a conversation with Jehovah's Witnesses. At some point, I plan to do a series on Jehovah's Witnesses and possibly also even a series on Islam. In fact, I've had about 5 hours of conversation several years ago with a Muslim from Jordan with whom I got to share the gospel. And so, yeah, lots of good stuff that we've talked about here on Truthspresso. Lots of good stuff to look forward to in the not too distant and the far distant future, God willing. And so that is reason number 2 to vote for Truthspresso in the Dead Men Walking podcast contest. Number 3, repeat reasons number 1 and number 2. You know, like wash, rinse, and repeat, that kind of jazz. So just like shampoo, there's your reasons to vote for Truthspresso. And so I will provide links in the show notes. The voting is going to be done on X, formerly known as Twitter. And so follow the links in the show notes and go vote for Truthspresso. And I would like to thank you all for being faithful listeners to the Truthspresso podcast. And so stay tuned for the next episode of Truthspresso, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Truthspresso. Be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast app. Truthspresso is a member of the Christian podcast community. Check out other great faith-building shows at ChristianPodcastCommunity.org.